The bastard wasn't just yelling, he was dismantling her piece by piece. How many zeros does it take, Habibti, to buy your kind of silence? His spittle landed close. Right then, Aurelia, the kind of restaurant where even the air tasted of privilege, felt like a cage. And Tariq al-Jil, the titan himself, he wasn't just mad, he was hunting for blood. He had no idea that she knew his language better than his lawyers did, that her home was a whisper away, a whisper about the Al-Salt Mountains and his grandfather. They think she's just a waitress? They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. A man so powerful his anger could shake markets. He was about to ruin a restaurant, a career, and a multi-billion-dollar deal with a single, furious exit. But one voice speaking a language he thought no one in this world understood made him freeze in his tracks. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of how a few words changed everything. The air in Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, was thick with the scent of money and saffron-infused risotto. For Bellevance, it smelled mostly of anxiety. Each clink of crystal silverware against burner china was a reminder of the chasm between her life and the lives of the people she served. Her apron, starched to a crisp by the restaurant's laundry service, felt more like a costume she could barely afford to rent. Bella wasn't supposed to be here, not in this life. Her childhood was a tapestry of sun-drenched courtyards in Amman, the scent of cardamom coffee brewed by her diplomat father's friends, and the lyrical cadence of the Arabic language that was as much her mother tongue as English. She had attended the American community school with the children of ambassadors and royals, but that life had shattered. A series of bad investments by her father, followed by his sudden passing, had left her and her mother with a mountain of debt and a collection of fading photographs. Now home was a tiny studio apartment in a less than glamorous part of the city, and her world had shrunk to the polished floors of Aurelia. Tonight the tension in the restaurant was wound particularly tight. It coiled around one table in the private alcove, table 7. This was the domain of Mr. Tariq al-Jil, the CEO of Al-Jamil Enterprises, a global conglomerate with its hands in everything from renewable energy to luxury real estate. He was a man whose profile in Forbes was always accompanied by words like titan, visionary, and uncompromising. To the staff at Aurelia, he was simply the shark. He was handsome in a severe, intimidating way, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was dining with a group of American executives from Sterling Price Global, led by a portly man named Robert Sterling, whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Bella, thanks to her impeccable service record and unnerving calm, had been assigned the table by the restaurant's manager, a perpetually sweating man named Mr. Henderson. Vance, Henderson had hissed, pulling her aside. Not a single mistake. Mr. Al-Jil's check could fund this restaurant for a month. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact for too long. Just be a ghost who pours water and delivers plates. For the first hour, Bella was exactly that. She moved with a practiced grace, refilling water glasses, placing dishes on the table with a silent precision that belied the frantic pounding in her chest. The conversation at the table was a low, guttural dance of negotiation. She didn't need to understand the specifics of the sovereign wealth fund or the logistics contract to feel the friction. Sterling and his team were all broad smiles and easy charm, while Tar Alj and his 2 aides were stone-faced, their occasional comments clipped and sharp. Tar barely acknowledged her existence. He waved a dismissive hand for more water, his focus entirely on a tablet in front of him, displaying complex charts and figures. Bella felt the familiar sting of invisibility. To these men, she was just part of the furniture, a functioning automaton. She remembered a time when she sat at tables like this, discussing philosophy and politics with her father's guests, her opinions valued. Now her only valued attribute was her ability to disappear. She was clearing the appetizer plates when she first heard it. One of Sterling's younger associates, trying to make a joke, butchered a simple Arabic greeting he had likely learned from a 5-minute internet video. As-salama. What's it called? He laughed awkwardly. Tariq al-Jil's eyes, cold and dark, lifted from his tablet for the first time. He didn't say a word, but a chill descended on the table. The young executive's face reened, and he fell silent. Bella's hand, holding a stack of porcelain plates, trembled slightly. It was a small thing, a clumsy attempt at rapport, but to her ears it was like nails on a chalkboard. It was the casual disrespect, the reduction of a rich, beautiful language to a party trick. She retreated to the kitchens, her heart heavy. It was more than just the bad Arabic. It was the whole scene, the arrogant men, the colossal sums of money being thrown around while she worried about making rent. The ghost of her past life mocking her from the other side of the dining room. She felt trapped, a silent observer in a world she once belonged to. She straightened her apron, took a deep breath to quell the rebellion in her soul, and prepared to return to the table. The main course was next, and the night was far from over. The main course arrived under silver cloches, a symphony of perfectly seared Wagyu beef and truffle-dusted potatoes. Bella served each guest with the fluid, impersonal motions Henderson demanded. But the atmosphere at Table 7 had soured. The forced pleasantries had evaporated, leaving behind the raw, abrasive edge of a deal on the verge of collapse. Robert Sterling, his face now flushed with wine, and frustration had dropped his pretense of charm. With all due respect, Tar Sterling said, his voice a little too loud. Our offer is more than generous. We're talking about a legacy project. Sterling Price is offering a turnkey solution. Tariq Alj leaned back, placing his fork and knife down with a quiet finality. He hadn't touched his steak. Your turnkey solution, Robert, involves subcontractors with questionable labor practices and a complete disregard for the environmental impact. It is not generous. It is insulting. Now let's not get carried away, Sterling chuckled, but it was a brittle sound. This is business. We can't let sentimentality get in the way of progress. Sentimentality. Tariq's voice was dangerously low. My father started this company with a promise to build, not to exploit. The land you want to develop is near Al Salt in Jordan. It is not just a plot on a map to me. Bella froze mid-pour, the bottle of sparkling water hovering over a glass. Also, she had spent a summer there as a teenager, hiking the hills, sketching the ancient Roman architecture, and listening to the stories of the local elders. The thought of a soulless corporation like Sterling Price tearing into that landscape sent a wave of nausea through her. Sterling, oblivious, pressed on. It's a barren patch of desert, for crying out loud. We'd be doing them a favor. Bringing jobs, infrastructure. He waved his hand dismissively. You have to be realistic. It's how the world works. That was the final fracture. The dismissal of his heritage, the condescension, the reduction of his father's legacy to a simple transaction. It was too much. Tar Alj's face became an unreadable mask of fury. He pushed his chair back the legs, scraping violently against the marble floor. The sound echoed in the hushed restaurant. This meeting is over, he declared. The words were not shouted, but they carried the force of a thunderclap. His two aides, silent until now, immediately stood up, gathering their papers. Henderson, who had been watching from across the room, skewered over his face, pale with panic. Is everything all right, Mr. Aljil? Is the steak not to your liking? We can have the chef prepare something else immediately. Tar looked right through him as if he were a pane of glass. His focus was entirely on Robert Sterling, who now looked stunned and bewildered. You come to my table, you insult my intelligence, you insult my family's legacy, and you insult an entire nation's heritage. You believe your money gives you the right to be ignorant. It does not. He turned to one of his aides and began speaking in rapid, furious Arabic. Bella, rooted to the spot, understood every single word. It was the crisp, educated dialect of the Alman elite, laced with anger. Tell the pilot to have the jet ready. We are leaving tonight. Cancel the hotel. I will not spend another minute in this city and draw up a counteroffer for the logistics contract to Sterling Price's biggest competitor. I want them ruined. The aide nodded, already tapping on his phone. Sterling stood up, sputtering, Now hold on, TK. This is a misunderstanding. But TK had already turned his back. He was striding towards the exit, a vortex of controlled rage. Henderson was babbling apologies, wringing his hands, a captain on a sinking ship. The entire restaurant was watching now, conversations dying in a ripple of shock. Bella watched the scene unfold, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the deal collapsing. She saw Henderson's inevitable wrathful fallout, which would surely land on her. But more than that, she felt a profound, unexpected surge of anger on Tariq's behalf. Sterling's casual bigotry had struck a nerve deep inside her, awakening the part of her that remembered the beauty and pride of the world he was defending. Everything was about to be lost in a storm of pride and misunderstanding. As Tariq Alj reached the grand archway of the main dining room, his path to the door clear, Bella did something she wasn't supposed to do. She moved and she spoke. As Tar Alj's expensive leather shoes crossed the threshold from the private alcove into the main dining room, a clear, calm voice cut through the chaos. It wasn't Henderson's panicked squeaking or Sterling's indignant protests. It was a woman's voice speaking a language no one in that room expected to hear. Patience is a tree whose root is bitter, but its fruit is very sweet. The words were spoken in flawless, unaccented Levantine Arabic. It was not the stilted formal Arabic of a textbook. It was the language of proverbs, of home, of deep cultural understanding. The accent was so pure, so familiar. It was as if a voice from his childhood had suddenly echoed through the sterile, opulent restaurant. Tariq Alj froze. His entire body went rigid, his hand still reaching for the arm of his aide. He stopped so abruptly that his security detail moving to flank him at the exit almost collided with each other. The forward momentum of his fury hit an invisible wall. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes scanning the room, trying to locate the source of the voice. The entire restaurant fell into a deafening silence. Diners stared forks halfway to their mouths. Henderson's jaw hung open. Robert Sterling and his team looked around in utter confusion, clueless as to what had just been said, but keenly aware of its stunning effect on the billionaire. Bella stood by the now-abandoned table 7, her back straight, her hands clasped behind her. Her heart was a hummingbird trapped in her chest, but her voice had been steady. She had quoted an old Bedouin proverb, one her own father used to recite when negotiations grew tense. It was a plea for calm, a reminder of wisdom and a signal that someone in this room understood. Tariq's eyes found her. He stared at the waitress, this anonymous girl in a black apron who had been a silent fixture all evening. He saw her properly for the first time. He saw the intelligence in her clear gray eyes, the proud set of her jaw. There was no subservience in her posture now. She met his gaze directly holding it. He took a slow step back towards the alcove, his expression a mixture of disbelief and intense curiosity. His aides exchanged wary glances, unsure how to proceed. He spoke to her in Arabic, his tone no longer furious, but sharp with suspicion and command. "Who are you? And where did a waitress in this city learn to speak my language like she was born to it?" Bella replied in the same language, her voice still level, though it took every ounce of her willpower. "My name is Bella Vance. I did not learn it, sir. I simply remembered it from my home." She chose the word for home, bait, that implied not just a house, but a place of belonging, a homeland. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Tariq's eyes. The anger was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, disarming intrigue. He had been surrounded all night by people who saw him as a walking bank account, who mangled his culture for their own gain. And now a waitress, a ghost, had spoken to the core of his identity with a single, perfectly chosen proverb. He glanced back at Sterling, whose face was a mask of bewilderment. He then looked at the fumbling, panicked Henderson. Finally, his gaze returned to Bella. In that moment, he seemed to make a decision that would alter the course of the entire evening and her entire life. He gestured curtly to his aides. "Wait for me in the car," he commanded in Arabic. Then, switching to a clipped, authoritative English that made everyone flinch, he addressed the room. To Sterling, he said, "Our discussion is not over, but it will not continue with you." To Henderson, he said, "Clear this alcove. I require privacy." And to Bella, he said with an intensity that made the air crackle, You are not going anywhere. Sit down. We need to talk." The silence that followed Tariq Alj's commands was absolute. His aides vanished without a word. Henderson jolted into action, practically shooed the bewildered Sterling Price team out of the alcove, his face a mess of apologies and confusion. He then stood hovering near the table, wringing his hands. "Sir, I assure you this waitress will be disciplined." Her behavior was completely out of line. Tar cut him off with a glacial stare. "Leave us," he said. "It wasn't a request." Henderson scurried away, casting a venomous look back at Bella. She stood alone in the alcove with the billionaire, the half-eaten plates of an abandoned multi-million-dollar dinner sitting between them like casualties of war. The adrenaline that had propelled her to speak was now fading, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. She had broken every rule. She would be fired. That was certain. "Sit," Tariq repeated, gesturing to the chair opposite him, the one Robert Sterling had just vacated. Hesitantly, Bella pulled out the plush velvet chair and sat her apron, feeling utterly ridiculous. She was hyper-aware of her worn, sensible shoes against the plush Persian rug. She folded her hands in her lap, waiting for the axe to fall. Tar sat as well, leaning forward, his forearms resting on the table. He studied her, his eyes intense and analytical, as if she were a complex equation he was determined to solve. "Balance," he said, testing the name on his tongue. "You said you remembered the language from your home. Explain." Taking a steadying breath, Bella told him. She spoke of her father, a cultural attaché with the State Department, of her childhood in Amman, of the friends she'd made, the food she'd eaten, the language that had been the soundtrack to her formative years. She didn't embellish or plead for sympathy. She simply stated the facts of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. As she spoke, she saw a subtle shift in his demeanor. The hard corporate shell seemed to crack just a little. He knew the places she mentioned, the specific dialect. She used the cultural nuances she instinctively understood. "You knew my country better than the men who want to build in it," he said. A statement of fact, not a compliment. He leaned back. "Those fools, they see a map. They see resources to be extracted. They don't see the people. They don't understand that respect is the only currency that matters before any contract is signed." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "What you did was impulsive. It was a breach of your protocol. Your manager wants you fired." Bella's stomach clenched. "I understand," but he continued, holding up a hand. "It was also the most intelligent thing that has happened in this room all night. You didn't just speak a language, Miss Vance. You understood the moment. You understood what needed to be said." He fell silent for a long moment, a plan clearly forming behind his eyes. Bella's mind raced. What did he want? An apology? An explanation? What he said next shattered her reality. "This deal with Sterling Price is not dead," he began, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial, businesslike tone. "It is merely stalled. They have the distribution network I need, but they are arrogant and culturally blind. They need a bridge. They need a translator who understands more than just words. They need someone who understands honor." He leaned forward again, his gaze locking with hers. "I am terminating my contract with the translation service I have been using. Their interpreter sat here all night and said nothing of value. As of this moment, I am offering you a job." Bella stared at him, speechless. A job, sir. I'm a waitress." "I am not hiring a waitress," he counted swiftly. "I am hiring a cultural liaison and personal translator. The negotiations will resume tomorrow morning at my hotel. You will be there. You will translate for me. You will advise me. You will be the bridge." He named a salary for the project. It was a figure so astronomical it made Bella feel dizzy. It was more than she could make in 10 years at Aurelia. It was enough to settle her father's remaining debts to ensure her mother's security to breathe again. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I don't have the right clothes. I don't have any experience in corporate negotiations." "I have people who will solve the problem of clothes," he said, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand. "As for experience, you have lived it. That is more valuable than any business degree. Your only job is to ensure that I am not misunderstood and that they understand exactly what I mean. I need your authenticity, not your resume." He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "A car will pick you up at 7 a.m. One of my assistants will contact you within the hour to get your address and details. They will bring a contract and everything you need for tomorrow." He walked towards the exit, then paused and looked back at her. "There is one condition, Miss Vance." "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "From this moment on, you work for me. Your loyalty is to me and to the success of this project. To no one else. Is that understood? Yes, she said, her voice finding a surprising strength. Yes, it is. He gave a single sharp nod and was gone, leaving Bella alone at the table, the scent of expensive perfume and ozone in his wake. She stared at the cooling Wagyu beef, her world completely and irrevocably upended by a single familiar proverb. She had walked into Aurelia that evening as a waitress. She was leaving as something else entirely. The next morning was a blur of surreal luxury. At precisely 7 a.m., a gleaming black sedan, the kind that usually purred past Bella on the street, was waiting outside her modest apartment building. A woman with a sleek bob and a tablet. Tarek's assistant greeted her with brisk efficiency. In her apartment, a wardrobe bag was waiting, containing 3 exquisitely tailored business suits in shades of charcoal, navy, and cream, along with shoes and accessories. The contract was on her small kitchen table, the numbers still making her feel light-aided. She signed it with a hand that trembled slightly. An hour later, she was walking through the marble lobby of the Four Seasons, not as a waitress dreaming of a different life, but as a consultant, a key player. She felt like an imposter, the expensive silk blouse and tailored blazer, feeling like another more elaborate costume. The negotiations took place in a penthouse suite with a panoramic view of the city. The atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. Robert Sterling and his team were there, their expressions a mixture of resentment and forced cordiality. They looked at Bella with undisguised suspicion as she took her seat beside Tar Algil. "A new translator, Tar?" Sterling asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Found one at the restaurant, did you?" Before Bella could feel the sting of the insult, TK answered, his voice smooth as ice. "Miss Vance is not a translator, Robert. She is my new strategic advisor on cultural affairs. I suggest you listen to her as carefully as you listen to me." The smirk vanished from Sterling's face. The day was a grueling trial by fire. Bella's role quickly became far more than just translating words. When Sterling's team used aggressive, blunt language, "This is our final offer, take it or leave it," she would translate the words accurately to Tar in Arabic, but then add her own context in a hushed tone. "Sir, their approach is confrontational. It is a power play. A softer, more indirect response that emphasizes mutual benefit might be more effective." When Tarek responded with a fiery Arabic statement about honor and long-term partnership, she wouldn't just translate the literal meaning for Sterling's team. She would rephrase it in the corporate language they understood, softening the edges without losing the core message. "Mr. Al-Jamel wishes to emphasize that the foundation of this venture must be built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future, not just short-term profit margins." She was a bridge, just as he'd said. She was navigating the treacherous waters between 2 vastly different cultures. She saw the subtle nods of approval from Tarek, the growing frustration from Sterling, who was no longer in control of the narrative. During a lunch break, while the 2 teams ate in separate rooms, Tar spoke to her. "The land the project is on," he said, looking out the window at the cityscape. "It is near the Wadashu. My grandfather used to take me there as a boy. He told me that if you build something, it must honor the ground it stands on." Bella's breath caught. "I know it well. My family used to picnic there. The wildflowers in the spring are like a carpet of purple and gold." He finished, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was the first time she had seen him look at something other than a business rival or a balance sheet. In that moment, he wasn't just Tariq Alj, the billionaire titan. He was a man connected to a place she loved, a man carrying the weight of his grandfather's words. A shared history, fragile and unexpected, began to weave itself between them. The connection deepened, but so did the danger. Bella noticed small things, the way one of Sterling's junior analysts would watch her a little too closely when she spoke with Tar. The way Sterling would make pointed remarks about her sudden rise from serving canapes to advising on billion-dollar deals. She was an anomaly, an outsider, and that made her a target. The pressure came to a head on the 3rd day. They were arguing over a particularly contentious clause regarding local labor sourcing. Sterling's team was pushing for their own international contractors, while Tariq was adamant about investing in the local Jordanian workforce. The negotiations had stalled. During a short recess, Tariq's chief aide, a stern man named Ferris, approached Bella in the hallway. "You have his ear," Ferris said, his tone accusatory. This insistence on local labor, it is not fiscally optimal. It is sentimental. You are encouraging this. You are reminding him of the past instead of focusing him on the future. The past is why he is doing this, Bella retorted, her own confidence surprising her. His grandfather's legacy is the foundation of the deal. Without it, he's just another corporate raider like Sterling. It's his greatest strength. Ferris sneered. You are a waitress. Do not forget what you are. You are temporary. Do not overstep. The warning sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't just fighting the American team anymore. There were politics and jealousies within Tariq's own camp. She was in a gilded cage surrounded by luxury, but also by resentment. She had earned Tariq's trust, but in doing so, she had made enemies who saw her as a threat, an unwelcome influence on their powerful boss. And she was about to find out just how far they would go to remove her. They had made a breakthrough on the fourth day. The air in the penthouse, once thick with intractable hostility, had finally cleared. Bella's compromise, the joint venture training program, was more than a clever negotiation tactic. It was a bridge built of empathy, a solution that honored both Tariq's heritage and Sterling's pragmatism. As the day concluded, Tar had looked at her not with the calculating gaze of an employer, but with unvarnished admiration. You see the whole board, Bella, he'd said quietly as they packed their briefcases. Not just the next move. The words had warmed her more than any monetary bonus could. For the first time since her father's passing, she felt seen, not for what she had lost, but for who she was. That evening, back in the silent opulence of her hotel suite, she felt a sense of peace that had long been a stranger. She was no longer an imposter wearing a costume. The tailored blazer felt like her own skin. The complex legal documents on the table felt like her native language. This was the world she was meant for, a world of intellect and strategy she thought she had been permanently exiled from. Her laptop chimed, signaling a new email. It was from Tar's personal account, its encryption level marked as critical. The subject line was simple, confidential, for your eyes only. Her breath caught. Inside was the final, fully revised proposal. It was the culmination of the week's work, but it was also something more. It contained the sensitive inner sanctum of their strategy, the tiered concession plan, the precise financial analytics of Aljamil Enterprises, and most critically, the absolute lowest figure they would accept before walking away from the table, a number known to only 3 other people in the entire company. This wasn't just a document. It was the ultimate gesture of trust. It was Tariq formally welcoming her into his war council. She felt a profound sense of gravity as she opened the file. For the next 2 hours, she didn't just read it, she absorbed it, cross-referencing clauses, analyzing the subtle shifts in legal terminology, and memorizing the crucial numbers. She was preparing for the final battle tomorrow, ready to stand beside him, not as a hired translator, but as a trusted advisor. She finally powered down her laptop, the city lights twinkling below her window like a silent, glittering ovation. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond just surviving, a future where her skills had a purpose. She awoke the next morning with a newfound confidence. She chose a charcoal gray suit, its sharp lines feeling like armor, its silk blouse a soft promise against her skin. Walking through the hotel lobby, she held her head high. The imposter syndrome that had plagued her finally banished. She was Bella Vance's advisor to Terrell J., and she was ready to close this deal. The moment she stepped onto the penthouse floor, however, the triumphant feeling dissolved into ice. The energy was wrong. It wasn't the charged professional atmosphere of negotiation. It was the dead cold air of a crime scene. Sterling's team was gathered on one side of the room, their usual aggressive postures replaced by a predatory stillness. Robert Sterling himself leaned against the conference table, a smug reptilian smile on his face. On the other side stood Tariq's team. His aide, Ferris, looked pale and agitated, but it was Tariq who stopped her heart. He was standing by the panoramic window, his back to the room, but the rigid set of his shoulders screamed of a fury, so profound it had frozen into something far more dangerous. "What's happened?" Bella asked, her voice a near whisper, as she approached Ferris. Before he could answer, Sterling's voice boomed across the room, dripping with false commiseration. "Ah, the special advisor arrives. We were just discussing your remarkable efficiency, Miss Vance. Tar turned then slowly, and the look in his eyes was a physical blow. The warmth, the respect, the burgeoning partnership she had seen in his gaze for days was gone. In its place was a barren wasteland of ice and betrayal. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger, a venomous one. Last night, Sterling continued savoring every word in a surprising act of corporate transparency. We received an anonymous email. It contained, shall we say, some enlightening bedtime reading. He theatrically tapped a tablet on the table, turning the screen for all to see. Bella's world tilted. Displayed on the screen in perfect detail was the confidential proposal. Her proposal, the one sent to her, and only her just hours before. Every strategy, every concession, every last decimal point of your bottom line. Sterling purred, his eyes glinting. It seems the price of loyalty isn't what it used to be. The deal we discussed yesterday is, of course, null and void. We'll be presenting a new offer shortly, one that reflects this new information. The sabotage was absolute. It was a kill shot aimed at the heart of their entire position. Tariq's voice, when he finally spoke, was a low growl that vibrated through the floor. He addressed Ferris, but his eyes never left Bella. How many people had access to that file, Ferris? A picture of distress wrung his hands. Only the most senior board members, sir. Your trusted circle. And he let his voice trail off, casting a sorrowful, damning glance at Bella. Miss Vance, of course. You authorized her access last night. The implication hung in the air thick and suffocating. A waitress from a downtown bistro, one of Sterling's executives, scoffed, shaking his head as if in pity. It's a bold move, I'll give her that. She probably saw a chance for a much bigger payday than you were offering, Tariq. A retirement fund in a single keystroke. She has no history with the company, no long-term loyalty, Ferris added his voice, a carefully crafted tool of reason and poison. She is an outsider, a temporary hire. Her background, it is not one of stability. People in desperate situations do desperate things. Every word was a nail in her coffin. They had crafted a perfect, plausible narrative. The desperate girl given a taste of wealth who immediately sold it for more. It was simple, ugly, and from their perspective entirely believable. She turned to Tar, her heart fracturing. I didn't do it, she said, her voice trembling but clear. You have to believe me. I would never betray your trust. She took a step towards him, pleading with her eyes. I swear on my father's memory I did not do this. At the mention of her father, a flicker of something doubt-pain crossed his face. For a heart-topping second, she thought she had reached him. But then the wall of ice slammed back into place, colder and harder than before. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable to trust this outsider, and the consequence was this public catastrophic humiliation. His pride, the bedrock of his entire being, had been shattered, and she was the hammer. Leave the room, Miss Vance, he commanded. The voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which was so much worse than shouting. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. Go back to your suite. Do not contact anyone. Do not leave the hotel. This matter will be handled. The dismissal was absolute. It was an excommunication. As she turned her legs feeling like lead, she felt the burn of Sterling's triumphant smirk and Ferris's righteous glare on her back. The short, dizzying flight was over. She was crashing back to earth, and the impact was going to be devastating. The heavy door of the hotel suite clicked shut, and the silence that enveloped Bella was more deafening than any accusation. The opulent room, which hours ago had felt like a symbol of her ascent, was now a gilded cage, its panoramic view of the city, a mocking testament to the world she had just been violently ejected from. She sank onto the edge of the king-size bed, the plush fabric feeling cold and alien. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. She saw Tarek's face, the transformation from admiration to a cold, contemptuous mask of betrayal. He hadn't just fired her. He had convicted her in his mind. He thought she was cheap. He thought her loyalty, her intelligence, her very character were all for sale. A wave of despair so profound, it felt like drowning pulled her under. She thought of her mother, of the hope that had bloomed in their phone calls over the past few days. She thought of the mountain of debt she had been so close to conquering. It had all been an illusion, a cruel fairy tale that had ended, as they always do, at the stroke of midnight. Her first instinct was to run, to pack the single small suitcase she'd arrived with, leave the designer clothes that felt like stolen goods, and disappear back into the anonymity of the city, back to her life of just getting by. She stood and walked to the full-length mirror, seeing a reflection she barely recognized. A woman in a charcoal suit that cost more than her rent, her face pale with shock. But as she stared into her own eyes, a different feeling began to stir beneath the despair. It was the faint, stubborn ember of defiance. They had underestimated her. Ferris with his petty jealousy, Sterling with his corporate avarice, even Tar with his proud wounded blindness. They all saw Waitress, a fortunate nobody who had stumbled into their world. They had no idea who she really was. She closed her eyes and the image of her father came to her, not as a tragic memory, but as a source of strength. He had been a diplomat in one of the most volatile regions in the world. He navigated rooms filled with suspicion and hidden agendas. His only weapons, his intellect, his empathy, and his preternatural ability to observe. He taught her to see the person, not the title, to listen to what wasn't being said. Power is rarely the loudest voice in the room, Ellie. He used to say, it's the one who understands the quietest whisper. The thought was a key turning a lock in her mind. She stopped thinking like a victim and started thinking like a strategist, like her father's daughter. She began to deconstruct the entire week, not emotionally, but analytically. She sifted through every meeting, every conversation, every subtle glance. And then it emerged from the fog of her memory, sharp and clear. The detail she had subconsciously filed away. It was from 2 days ago during a coffee break. Ferris and the junior analyst from Sterling's team, the nervous young man named Mark Renshaw, standing a little too close in a hallway alcove. It wasn't a casual chat. Ferris had been speaking in a low, intense voice, his hand gripping Renshaw's arm. Renshaw had been nodding, his face pale, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. At the time, she had registered it as inter-team tension. Now she saw it for what it was, a transaction, a point of leverage. Her mind ignited. She had no time for forensics or digital trails. Tar's team was already building a case against her. She needed to build a better one, faster. She snatched her phone from the nightstand. There was one person she could call a ghost from her old life. Ben Carter had been the head of security at the embassy and a man, a former intelligence operative who moved with a quiet, unassuming deadliness. He had been fiercely loyal to her father. "Ben, it's Ellie Vance," she said the moment he answered, her voice low and tight with urgency. "I'm calling in the big one. I need everything you can find on a man named Mark Renshaw. He's a junior financial analyst at Sterling Price Global. I don't want a corporate profile. I want the real story, finances, family, any weaknesses. I need to know what kind of leverage someone could hold over him, and I need it yesterday." Ben, ever the professional, didn't ask why. He just said, "I'm on it. Stay by your phone." The next 45 minutes were the longest of her life. She paced the suite, a caged tiger, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and risk. She knew she had only one shot to fix this. If she failed, she wouldn't just be fired. She could be facing legal action. When her phone finally buzzed, her heart leaped. It was an encrypted text from Ben. The information was concise. Mark Renshaw, 28, clean record, but with one massive vulnerability. His widowed mother had recently been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer. Local treatment had failed. Her only hope was an experimental therapy at a private clinic in Geneva. The cost was astronomical. The text concluded with the kill shot. Clinic records show an initial anonymous wire transfer of $250,000 was received 2 days ago. Source account is untraceable, routed through 3 shell corporations. There it was. Not just greed, desperation. Ferris hadn't bought Renshaw. He had trapped him. Now for the endgame. She couldn't just present this evidence. It was compelling, but not definitive. She needed a confession. She needed to detonate the truth in the middle of the penthouse suite. Taking a deep breath, she composed a text message to Tariq. Her fingers hovered over the screen, aware that everything depended on these few words. I can prove my innocence and expose the real traitor, she wrote. But you have to trust me one last time. Get both teams back in the penthouse in 1 hour. Tell them you are ready to accept their new terms and concede. It is vital they believe they have won. She hit send, her heart pounding. It was an audacious, almost insane request. She was asking this titan of industry, a man whose pride was his armor, to fee in total surrender based on the word of the woman he believed had just betrayed him. She had no idea if he'd even read it. An hour later, a sharp knock echoed on her door. A stoic security guard stood in the hall. "Mr. Al-Jamil requests your presence." She walked down the hallway, her stride confident, her posture erect. This was not a walk of shame. It was a march to battle. When she entered the suite, the atmosphere was thick with Sterling's smug victory. He and his team were laughing, pouring themselves drinks from the bar. Tar was there playing his part to perfection, standing by the table with a look of grim resignation. He glanced at her as she entered, his eyes unreadable, but he gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He had received her message. He had trusted her. "Ah, the guest of honor," Sterling sneered, raising his glass. "Come to watch the final act." Bella ignored him. She walked calmly to the center of the room, her presence commanding a sudden, unexpected silence. She turned her gaze not to Tariq or Sterling, but directly to Mark Renshaw, who flinched as if she had shone a harsh light on him. "Mark." She began, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "I just wanted to offer my sincere hope for your mother's recovery. It must be a great relief to know she's getting the best possible care in Geneva." The color drained from Renshaw's face. Sterling looked at his analyst, confused. Ferris, standing near Tar, stiffened almost imperceptibly. That kind of treatment, that kind of hope. "It has a price," Bella continued, her voice laced with a soft, devastating empathy. "A price a junior analyst could never afford. But a desperate tool will do anything for his mother. He might even agree to betray his company, to forward a single critical email, especially if the man who asked him to do it promised that it was a victimless act, a simple way to secure the money, and maybe even a promotion for his troubles." She let her eyes drift to Ferris, whose face had become a mask of stone. "But men who deal in betrayal are not known for keeping their promises, are they? Did he promise you a future, Mark? Or did he just use your family's pain to satisfy his own petty jealousy?" Renshaw was visibly trembling now, his breathing shallow. He looked like a cornered animal. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes darted towards Ferris. "This is an outrageous performance," Ferris boomed, stepping forward. "She is a cornered liar, throwing out wild accusations to deflect from her own guilt." It was then that Tar finally moved. He picked up his phone from the table, his movement slow and deliberate. "Is it a wild accusation, Ferris?" he asked, his voice lethally calm. "Because it is a strange coincidence. My security team has spent the last hour reviewing the hotel's high-definition surveillance footage. It's amazing what they can enhance these days. They found a very clear video from the hallway 2 nights ago. It shows you handing a small USB drive to Mr. Renshaw. It was a masterful bluff, a shot in the dark delivered with the certainty of a sniper, and it found its mark." Renshaw broke completely. A strangled small fourth escaped his lips. "He made me," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at a stunned Fries. "He told me no one would get hurt. He said Mr. Alge had endless money and that this would guarantee my mother's treatment. He said he would ruin me if I didn't." The confession hung in the air, shattering the smug victory of Sterling's team. Tarek's security was in the room in an instant, flanking a pale, speechless Faris and a weeping Renshaw. They were escorted out without another word. In the stunned silence that followed, Robert Sterling stared at the empty space where his leverage used to be. Tar walked over to Bella, his eyes, now clear of all ice, filled instead with a profound, humbling regret. "The greatest fool in this room was me," he said, his voice low and meant only for her. "I allowed my pride to be a weapon used against me, against you. That is an error in judgment. I will not repeat. Your loyalty, it is worth more than this entire deal. Forgive me." Looking into his eyes, she saw not a billionaire, but a man humbled by the truth. "We were both betrayed," she said softly. "Now let's make sure it wasn't for nothing." He gave her a grateful nod, a silent pact of a new, unbreakable alliance. Then he turned to the shell-shocked Robert Sterling. His voice rang out, filled with the calm, absolute authority he had held in reserve. "Now, Robert," he said, "the price of loyalty, it seems, is quite high after all, and you are about to pay it. We will be signing the original contract. My advisor, Miss Vance, will show you where to sign." 2 weeks later, the crisp scent of pine and wild thyme filled the air. Bella stood on a ridge overlooking the rolling hills of Alsalt, the late afternoon sun, casting a golden glow over the landscape of her childhood. She wore comfortable boots and linen trousers, not a waitress uniform or a power suit. Tar came to stand beside her, handing her a small glass of hot, sweet tea from a thermos. He had not only paid her a sum that had erased her family's past and secured their future, but had also created a new division within his empire, the Al Jamil Heritage Foundation. He had asked her to be its first director. Her job was to ensure that every project they built not only respected the land, but actively enriched the culture and its people. This project near her beloved Wadi Shwaibi was her first. "You are not just an advisor anymore," he said, his gaze on the horizon. "You are a builder." "I'm home," she replied, her voice filled with a quiet, profound joy. She had been a ghost in a restaurant, a stranger in a boardroom, but here, under the vast Jordanian sky, she was simply Bella. She had faced down betrayal and found her purpose not in a language, but in her own unwavering voice. The furious billionaire had been stopped in his tracks by her words, but in the silence that followed, they had begun to build a new world together. And so Bella's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by our job title or our circumstances. It's defined by who we are, the skills we nurture in silence, and the courage to speak up when it matters most. She went from being invisible to being invaluable, all because she dared to use her unique voice. Her journey with Tariq was just beginning, a partnership forged in fire and built on a foundation of mutual respect that would go on to build more than just projects, but a better future. If this story moved you, please don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strengths, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the extraordinary in the ordinary. What hidden talent do you have? Let us know in the comments below.